I'm Kat Trataris, and I manage exhibitions and programs here at SFAI, and we are doing a series of professional development workshops for artists that talk about different ways to approach showing your work and being a participant in the virtual art world in this moment. Today we have Alex Peterson, who's going to be demonstrating how to do documentation of your artwork at home, as well as some tricks to make your photographs look better and things like that, so that you can showcase your work online.
Yep. So I just want to start, we're going to go over a lot of things and it's going to be pretty quick, but this is being recorded. So if you ever need to go back and follow along with some of the steps I'm going to go over, you can do that. The video will be made available for you guys. So I'm going to talk a lot about like aesthetics, and then I'm going to go into some of the technical details and ways in which you can edit your photos that you're taking to be a little bit more professional. If you have questions as I'm going along, feel free to just unmute yourself and jump in. I'm not going to be, I can see the chat over here, so you can also ask questions in the chat box if you want to do that. So I'll just get started. So documenting your work, primarily, I mean, if you have a DSLR, we can have more in-depth conversations. For this one, I'm going to kind of just go over aesthetics, editing a little bit, but I'm going to primarily assume that most people are going to be doing this with their phone because of remote learning. Just the most accessible way in which we have access to photography. So I like to start talking about Dan McCarthy, just because I think that these are pretty successful, but also there's a few things I want to highlight on this page. Consistency is really, really important when you're photographing your work. So whatever you decide to do, you just want to make sure that you keep that consistent. That'll just make your body of work and everything seem more cohesive. So when you look down here, you can see that these are all probably photographed at slightly different times, because you can see that the background lighting is changing. So the ways in which you can stop that from happening are, you just want the lighting to be consistent. So the easiest way to do that is have control over your lighting. Also, if you can somehow get your phone to be in a stable position or whatever you're shooting within one place, that'll really help stop some of the back and forth between images. So we'll go to the next one. Providing context for sculptural images, I think, is really important. I really like when you can see the space that sculptures exist in. I feel like it's really helpful for scale, it's helpful for weight, perspective, especially when you're shooting at home. You probably won't have a giant white seamless backdrop to shoot on. So finding a clean, minimal space that you can shoot in, whether it's a corner, it's a tabletop, whatever you're using, you can incorporate those elements into your documentation. And it can actually be a strength rather than something that is distracting from your work. Here's more examples of just context. You know, I find it really successful when the images have the exact same framing, but I feel like there might be a difference in scale here, which is why the perspective is a little different. Other examples, so when I'm talking about having one consistent lighting source, this is kind of an example of someone that probably did not have a consistent lighting source. I do think these are still successful documentation images, but as you can see, you start to get these warm and cool spots. So you can see it's kind of warm and yellow down here, it's a little cooler and grayer up here. These are things that you can fix in editing, but if you have one consistent lighting source, whether it be natural light, whether it be you use inside light bulbs, like 2 lamps, making sure that those bulbs are the same kind of bulbs, will make it so that there's no difference in temperature depending on where you're placing the lights. Everything will look a little bit more uniform and a little bit more, yeah, just like there won't be like blotchiness to it. These are a little bit more moody. These are all by the same artist. I believe I kind of sourced these online a while ago. But you can see the way in which they're using light to create this kind of atmosphere. So having no background, they completely blew out the background with just a little minimal shadow here versus having more of like a context. You know, this is your work, and the photographs of it are going to be the way in which people experience your work. So you just want to think about how you want to be creating that atmosphere, what you're including in the image. You know, is it minimal and simple like this, or are you going to try to play with light and get a little bit more drama in your documentation? More examples of some different ways in which you can use the area and the context to inform your images. Sculptural work is a little bit more, like every sculpture is going to have its own unique quirk and things that you want to highlight. So there's a lot more flexibility with the ways in which you photograph it. So for instance, if like it was really important for you to get these shine marks or these highlights, you would obviously want to use your lighting and your photography to capture that. Or if it's like an overall feel. Detail shots are also another really great way to capture some of those things that are important. So if you have a wide shot of the whole sculpture like this, but it's really important that you see the texture on the chain and that the chain is a different texture than the rest of the sculpture, you could zoom in and like get your camera a little closer and capture some of those details, and those images can exist kind of side by side. Going on to two-dimensional work. So this is all from one artist's website, and I find that all these images are actually really successful, but you can see there's two kind of different ways of presenting this. There's the way in which you can see the painting and the wall behind it in the shadow, and you can see just the painting where they cropped in all the way, so all you see is the painting like frame. These are things that you want to consider before you start documenting. Is it really important that you get that depth with that shadow? These do look like rather deep images, so maybe that weight of the actual panel is really important to you, and you want to be able to present that. It's a little tricky. It's harder to do this. It's harder to get that nice drop shadow. It's harder to control. It generally will take a little bit more editing and a little bit more work to make this look really, really good. And I'm going to go through more examples of how to do this and ways in which it can be executed. But just keep in mind that getting things squared away like this and getting those shadows to be really, really clean like that, that's going to take a little bit more skill with lighting it, and it's going to take a little bit more skill with editing. Cropping in, generally you can mask some of those imperfections, and especially if you don't have a perfectly white wall or a pristine wall to hang your work on, this might be the option that you want to go with, because you're just going to get your painting, your drawing, your image in there. See, this is an example of I don't think this one is as successful, and you can see as they're going through, it kind of changes the background quality. Like this one has a drop shadow. It's pretty dark and it's pretty similar in tone to the painting, versus here it's a little bit lighter. And then here they're choosing to crop it in. You can see as you're navigating through this that it creates a little bit of a clunky experience for the viewer. So keeping it consistent and making these aesthetic decisions before you start documenting is going to be really important. I think body of work really well documented as you go through it. It feels really cohesive. They all have the same image quality. They flow into each other as you're navigating the website. There's less of a barrier. I'm not jarred by the background being different and changing. Here's another idea of just context in which things can live. This is a bit wild and a bit almost distracting from the work, but I think that it's also a really successful way of utilizing a different kind of environment for your work to live in. Especially, we're going to be documenting these things at home. You're probably going to be using a cell phone. Having some kind of visual element, maybe you put your two-dimensional work, like on clips and you hang it on the wall, or maybe, you're putting it on a wall in your home that has a color, like this gray background or something. Some of those different elements can help mask some of the technical imperfections of photographing with the phone. So if you're really worried about, the pristine of this is a little hard to achieve. So putting it into a context can help hide that essentially. So here's an example of some work I documented for Hadar. So you can see that a lot of the magic comes in editing. So this is a before and after. So this is a out of camera shot that I did, and this is the edited version. These are really, really large sculptures, and the backdrop wasn't even big enough for me to like fill the whole frame. And then also the backdrop and the floor that I was shooting on was a bit rough. So as you can see down here, there's a lot of like warping and imperfections. And it also made, you can see here, that it actually bent the shadow a little bit, which I thought was really, let's see if I can zoom in, nope. I really didn't like that, so I had to straighten out shadows. This is something I documented for Ileana. And again, you can see that given the space and the constraints that I had, there was some like distractions in the frame. It didn't matter because I knew that I was going to extend it in Photoshop, and I'm able to remove and hide this stuff. Another reason why I'm showing you these ones is you should always trust yourself versus trusting the camera. The camera is going to do the best it can to get the colors right, but I feel like there's, especially people that aren't photographers, that haven't done a lot of editing, they're really hesitant to do any corrections or adjustments after the photo's taken because they don't want to, alter the reality of, you want things to be as true to what it looks like in person as the documentation. And I feel like people are scared to edit, they don't want to make it look fake or like alter the reality of it. But the edited version here more closely reflects what I was seeing in person versus the camera. As you can see, there's a color tone cast here. I'll go over our white balance and how you can fix that. Also, let's see, yeah, there's distractions and stuff like that. So just don't be afraid of doing some adjustments in Photoshop. If you choose to edit it on your phone, if you choose to edit it in Photoshop or any other kind of editing program, I just want to enable you to like do the best you can. You can also see that this is a bit crooked. It's only a little bit crooked. I try my best to get things squared away. I'll go over that a little bit later, but I also straighten things out, make sure all the lines are really square. Here's just a bigger shot of it, and you can see the finished version. Your phone cameras are always going to be prioritizing like people, like the algorithms and the way in which it takes pictures is generally trying to make people look better, because like we all want to take like pictures of our family and friends with our phones. So that being said, things tend to be a little low contrast because it makes people's skin look better when there's less contrast. So if you're going to be taking pictures with your phone, usually what you're going to need to do in editing, you might want to brighten it up a little bit and you might want to add some contrast. And we can go over that a little bit more later. So here's an example of something I adopted for diagram, and I actually shot this on my phone. So the image on the left here is out of my phone quality. So that's kind of how I shot it. And then here's the final image. I took it into Photoshop and I did a little bit of editing. Due to my space constraints, this is David's work, there was another image right here and here. So I had to crop in pretty closely, but I wanted it to be square. So I extended the background out. I brightened up the background a little bit. I believe I don't have the Photoshop file for these. I'm gonna show you the one for Ileana. And then I also squared the frame a little bit. So if you can see, just due to the camera angle, I tried to get it as square as possible, but you can see it kind of slopes down and pinches at the bottom a tiny bit. That means that I was holding my phone at like a slight angle to it. Like even if you try to get as square as possible, if you're a little bit this way or a little bit this way or a little bit tilted in any way, it's gonna tilt the squareness of whatever you're shooting. So for this one, I was angled a tiny little bit. So in Photoshop, I just fixed it. I also brightened up the background a little bit because I didn't like this like cream color of it. I wanted it to look more like poppy and professional. Same goes for this. Oh, did someone's audio get unmuted? Does someone have a question? I'm just starting to hear it echo. Okay. So here I did a similar thing where fixed the squareness of it and extended the boundaries, and I lightened up the background. Here's an example of like a sculptural floral arrangement that I documented with my phone. I just put it in a locker at SFAI and I took a picture of it. So the way in which you control your lighting and your context can really add to a overall feel. And I feel like these images are like all pretty high quality for being shot with your phone. So as long as you're considering the context, your lighting, and then if you want to edit it at all, it'll really help elevate those images. Here's another one I shot with my phone that was documentation for a book for the SFAI Photo Instagram. So as you can see, I kind of created this narrative and have this feeling of a page turning without you seeing my hand, or yeah, I find seeing someone's hand a little bit distracting, so I tried my best to keep things square and to give you that sense of a page turning as you're moving through this book. And this is the contact sheet with Dion Lee. Just a couple other things that I documented. So this is some photographs of the monitors. It was hard because these are all reflective, so each photograph is reflective. So I did my best to get, if you have reflective materials, there's two ways in which you can do it. With controlled lighting at 45-degree angles, and you're standing here, it makes it so that the reflections bounce out of the frame, so it won't look reflective at all. I'll show you what that setup looks like. Or you can get something that's black behind you. So if you have a full black curtain or a black paper backdrop, what's actually being reflected in the glossy surface of the photograph will be black, which is nothing. It won't read on the camera. And here's another image that I documented. I kind of show this image in this presentation largely as a demonstration of like how much work it goes in to have something feel like authentic. So you can see they're using this gold paper here behind the image to give it that color, and how many different ways in which they're being shot. So this final image is actually a composite, which means they took probably 5 or 6 or maybe even up to 10 images and collaged them together to have this final effect. You can see here they're using the bounce card to bounce in these highlights on the side, so it has this really nice 3-dimensional glow to it. They shoot one with the backdrop there so that you get these colors. This is actually just the paper. And then they shoot one backdrop with the black, and then another with the light behind it. So being creative, and also just knowing that you can take your images and really make them sing. So this is kind of going into white balance a little bit. If you're using a DSLR, this is a little bit more important. For your phone, you don't have as much control. It's pretty much always going to be auto white balance. But here are examples of the color temperatures. Basically what it does is it's based on the type of light you have, and each light has a different temperature. So the camera is trying to make it so that the white is actually perceived as white and there's no color cast based on it. For instance, if you use tungsten bulbs, which is usually really yellow, if you go into someone's house and it has that like nice yellow warm glow at night, it's because they're using tungsten bulbs. So basically what the tungsten setting does is it adds blue to take away that yellow tone. So it's trying to balance it out. Here are more examples of what that looks like. So this is before and after color correcting. And then these are all the different settings based on the lighting. So you can see here, this is the most true to what we would expect it to look like. That means that the lighting was probably fluorescent, and they used the fluorescent setting, which took away any of that color cast. This is kind of, again, for shooting with the DSLR, and if you're using your phone, it's always pretty much going to be auto. So you're going to have to take whatever it is and then take that color cast away in Photoshop, which I'll show you how to do. This is what I was talking about in terms of shooting reflective materials, but also shooting, like this goes for graphite, right? Or a painting if it has any glossy kind of finishings to it. Having your lights at a 45-degree angle like this makes it so that when you're shooting from the middle, you're not going to get any glare, and it's going to be a nice even lighting for the whole image here. So here's an example. This is obviously a sculptural element. Like this is like a GoPro or something. But here's an example of what you could do at home. You know, it doesn't have to be these little desk lamps. It could be clip lamps. It could be larger lamps. Whatever kind of lighting you have to utilize, you can use. More examples, at-home versions. So here's just a simple piece of paper with natural lighting. If you ever use a bounce card, it just helps fill in shadows a little bit. So you can do that to bounce light back into the dark areas of a shadow. But here, you know, you can see that this is just window natural light on a gray piece of paper with a little foam core here that bounces this nice highlight back in. And then this is a little bit more, this one's more advanced, obviously it has backdrop stand. But here, again, it's just a chair with a piece of paper on it. Here's an example of somebody shooting, you know, they just put the earrings straight into a piece of paper and using natural light. So here are some screenshots of a Photoshop window. I'm actually going to exit out of this presentation and we're going to open up some images in Photoshop really quick. The white balancing tool in Camera Raw is a really, really important quick tool. It's really, really helpful. This is our straightening edge, which is also really helpful. I'm going to open these up in Photoshop and kind of walk you through that really quick. Lens corrections are important if you're shooting with a DSLR. It doesn't really apply as much when you're shooting with your phone. So these windows are in Camera Raw and are important if you're shooting with a DSLR, essentially. Okay, so I'm going to exit out of this presentation. Let's see. Let me minimize this. Okay, so first, let's open up Photoshop. Here's an example of that image of Ileana's that I was working on. You can see all the adjustments that I made here. For instance, here's lightening the background a little bit. Hue and saturation, I desaturated it a tiny bit because I felt like there was still a color cast after I color corrected. Here is the image that, here, I'll open it in Camera. So this window is Camera Raw. It's a pre-processing for Photoshop, and it has a lot of really useful tools. Ideally, you're shooting in a RAW format on a DSLR, and then you get the most out of Camera Raw, but it's still really helpful if you're shooting on your phone. So I'm going to cancel here for a second. In order to get Camera Raw to open up, you need to open up Photoshop. You go into File or Photoshop Preferences, and then you go down to Camera Raw. So you click here. Down here, where it says JPEG, HEIC, and TIFF handling, you want to hit automatically open all supported JPEGs and HEICs. HEIC is it's like a newer format of JPEG. Some phones will shoot with it. If you have a newer iPhone, some images tend to do this. So you want to do automatically open all JPEGs and automatically open all TIFFs, and then you can just hit OK. And that makes it so that, for instance, this is something I took on my phone just before this. If I open this in Photoshop, it will automatically open it in Camera Raw first. And then when you're done, you want to hit Open Image into, that'll open it into Photoshop. So I intentionally documented these really poorly so that I can give you a feel for some of the tools. So some useful things about Camera Raw. We'll start here. Up here, like I said in that other one, it's the straighten tool. If you ever just hover over tools, it'll tell you what it is. So hovering over this, it says straighten. Hovering over here, it's the transform tool. So this helps with our tilt shifting. Like I was saying, this image is really obvious how there's that tilting. Ideally, you want it to be really, really, really minimal. You want to get it as close as possible. So when I had, hold on, let's see if this is going to work. I think I freaked my computer out a little bit. Oh, there we go. David's up here. You can see how minimal that was. It's really, really small amount of tilt shifting. You want it to get as square as possible because as I show you the use of this tool, if it's really dramatic, if it's this bad, where it's super sloped, it starts to mess with the image quality and it kind of messes the ratio up as you try to correct it, and it's going to kind of distort things too much. If it's a really minor adjustment, you won't see distortion. It'll just make it look actually a lot more square. Minimize that. So we'll start here. We're use our straighten tool. So I clicked on it, and if you just draw a line across what you want to be straight, it's going to provide you with a crop that's going to help you do that. So that's how you use that. It's really easy. If you hover over crop, or if you click down into the crop menu, you could always clear crop here if you don't want to, if you want to revert it back to normal. And again, straightening, we're just going to click and drag, and then we're going to hit enter. This is our Whitebalance tool. So this is, oh, sorry, here's our Whitebalance tool, which is also really helpful. So if you want to get your image as close to white as possible, you're going to use this, or as accurate as possible. And then you just click something that you know to be white, and it's going to adjust that color balance. And here, this is our, see how it says toggle between current settings and defaults. If you click this on and off, it shows you the adjustments you made. So as you can see, it was a little bit green, and now it's a little bit, it's really minor adjustment. You might not even be able to see it on the web as well as I can see it on my screen. We could also do adjustments here. So shadows is really helpful if you just want to adjust your shadows. Maybe we want the wall to be a little bit darker. We can up our contrast if we want. We can up our exposure or highlights. I'm going to go ahead and revert this back to just normal. Another really useful tool, say you shot all of your images with the exact same lighting and you want everything to be consistent, you can hit Command A and it selects everything in the side menu. And now everything I do to this image that I'm looking at now, it's going to apply to everything here. So you can have up to, you know, hundreds of images here on the sidebar, and you scroll through. And if I adjust the temperature to be cool, I say that's how I want it all to look, it'll automatically apply that to the next image that you have selected. And that goes for all of your adjustments. So whatever you want to do to it, it'll make it so that they're all consistent. It cuts down on editing time, but it also makes it so that everything looks more uniform. That's where consistency is really important. If you have control over your lighting, if you have, just the most control, you're doing everything in the same way and you're photographing everything at the same time, then you can batch edit and it'll be a lot easier. If you did a unique lighting setup for each one, or you know, you change the lighting or what have you, it'll be a lot harder to batch. So we'll go in and we'll turn these off because those are hideous. Okay, so next I'm going to talk about the transform tool in Camera Raw. Again, this is best when done very minimally, but this is a really dramatic curve or a really dramatic arch here that I'm going to be correcting for. So it's going to look a little messy when I do it, but just go ahead and do that. Do you see how it kind of arches here? You can continue to fix for that in Photoshop if you wanted. It's really nice and square here. Most of the angles are good. I can bring this corner down in Photoshop to make it perfect. But as you see, what it does to the image is it distorts it. So now we're going to have to crop in. So that's a good reason why you always want to leave a little bit of room around your image, even if you plan to crop all the way in and you're just getting your painting or whatever in there. So say this is what you choose to do in the end. If you have to do any selective adjustments, you want space around so that it doesn't crop into your image further. Does that make, I hope that makes sense. So you can do that, and now we just have our little image there. I'm going to clear the crop. And I'm actually going to cancel the tilt shift. Let me just put this back at 0. I'll also show you, there's always multiple ways to do everything. So this is the camera raw tools. You can also do the same thing in Photoshop once you open the images. I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel for now. I'm going to open up Ileana's documentation here. So let's see. There's no adjustments. I'm going to show you the white balance tool. So white balance, you click the white balance tool, and then you want to click whatever you want to perceive as white. So you want to click a really bright area. Oh yeah, let me know if you have any questions. So if I click here, you should see, oh, there we go. It's just lagging a little bit. Do you see how it kind of removed that purple tone? I'm trying to see. Yeah. So by clicking it, it's automatically going to try to read whatever you're clicking on as neutral. It usually gets you like 80% in the ballpark, and then you're going to want to do whatever adjustments to make it perfect later. You can also here, I would probably try to straighten this out. Perfect. It also feels a little dark overall to me, so I would probably brighten it up a little bit. As you can see, just based on my lighting that I used for this, there's a shadow here on the side and a shadow here on the side. I didn't really like that as much. I felt like it was distracting. So when I actually brought it into Photoshop, I kind of brightened the background to make that go away. I liked the nice clean drop shadow down here. So that was me using the tools in Camera Raw. I'm going to go ahead and cancel because I've already edited this. So I'm going to open it up here. Same image, and you see now there's no shadows on the sides. These tools, these blue lines that you're seeing, are called our guides. So when you go over to the side where the rulers are, this is a little difficult because everyone's Photoshop window is going to be different. But if you go to View and then you go to Extras, you can hit check. It'll remove those, or sorry, go to View and then Show, or click Extras again, it'll show them. You can also go to Window, and you need to make sure that your, let's see, there's something called rulers. You just want to make sure that rulers are on. If you turn rulers off, you won't see those numbers on the side, and you can't drag these lines out. So go to View and then click Rulers. To drag one of these little blue lines, basically they're only a tool in Photoshop for you to be able to tell if things are square or not. They won't save. So when I save this image, they disappear. They're just there for reference. It's a tool. You click on the ruler and you drag over, and it pulls this line out. And wherever you set it, it sets a little blue line. So I'm going to go ahead, and to get it to go away, I think you grab it and then you can just drag it off. So what I did here, it's a more complicated way of doing it. I'm not going to go into it, but if you go to transform and then you go to perspective, you can drop points and you can use Photoshop to perfectly make everything square to this. It's a little bit of a complicated tool and it's harder to wiuse. So I would definitely use the Camera Raw one because it's going to be a little bit more applicable for a wide range of wider range. You know, it's just a little easier. This takes a lot more time and there's more room for error. It's going to take you probably like 4 times as long to do. So I'm just going to go ahead and exit out of it. So as you can see here, this is me lightening up the background, and this is also me lightening up the background. So to do that, we just do curves. Normally when I'm editing, here, I'll go ahead and turn everything off so you can see. Usually when I'm editing, I look at what I'm trying to adjust for. I adjust for it and then I mask it out. So what I do, and you know, everyone has their own way of doing this, but I look at the background and I will brighten it up until I feel like I get to the point that it's good. Maybe I want it to be like the white point to be a little higher, and then I'll raise the shadows a little bit. So say that that is where I feel like the background looks really good, but obviously, you know, we're blowing out our image a little bit, we're losing detail. So I go over to my mask. This is our mask here. So this is a little bit advanced Photoshop skills. So if this feels like a lot to go over, don't worry. I'm also available to walk you guys through if you need tutorials or if you want my help editing. I'm happy to do that via Zoom. And again, like, you can cut down on your editing if you make it as good in camera as possible. So that means controlling for your lighting. That means, you know, being happy with the arrangement. That can, you know, make it so that you don't have to do as many of these selective adjustments. I would hit Command I, and that inverses it so that it's not affecting any of the image. And then you want to somehow map out. So generally what I would do, use the rectangle marquee. You could go in, select that. And then I select inverse and then brush. So using the brush tool, which is here, and you have it on white and black, basically how a mask works, black means it's affecting nothing and white means it's affecting everything. So using the white brush tool, when I paint it in, it's actually using that curve adjustment that I just made. And then deselect. So you can see here, it's only affecting the background. I did a number of selective adjustments because, like, once you lighten the background, I was like, oh, now the image looks way too dark and it looks a little muddy. So I believe I like lightened it up a bit with this adjustment, et cetera, et cetera. I think this is a bit too harsh. So this is kind of where I ended up. Also, a useful tool, if you hit Control and you click on the background, this is how Photoshop defaults. It's this kind of dark gray, but I also find it helpful to do custom. And I set white because it helps me have a point of reference for like what's pure white. And especially if you're doing something on a white wall, you can see the difference in tone. Generally speaking, I don't want things to look false or too, yeah, I don't want it to look fake. So like, for instance, if I went here and I blew it out completely, or, you know, yeah, maybe I wanted the shadow to look dramatic. There's ways in which you can make it look really digital and phony, you know what I mean? So whenever I'm editing, I try to make it look like it could have been that way out of camera, essentially. Okay, here's another example. So I used this middle guide. I put it directly in the middle so I knew where the center point was. And this is me documenting another thing for Hadar. And you can see here, I brightened the background because there was this kind of vignetting happening. Just because our lighting source, we were trying to use a kind of like a lighting that was bought online, and it didn't really it wasn't as powerful as I wanted it to be, so it didn't like fill the background as much. So I lightened the background and I did a slight contrast and slight curves that just brightened it up a little bit. I'm going to open this document now. So I'll make this available for you guys. It's getting into your camera and it kind of walks you through the settings. It's a really helpful PDF that just breaks down photography in general. So it goes over what is white balance, the color temperatures, your exposure triangle. So if you are using a DSLR, it kind of walks you through what all the settings are and do. How to set your ISO. Again, these are things that you won't necessarily have access to if you're shooting on your phone or a point and shoot camera. But if you do have a DSLR and you are interested in using it, this is a really helpful guide that helps break that down. It talks about aperture, shutter speed, some helpful reminders here, and some set of stage. Sorry, my phone buzzed. And Kat is going to send out all these documents to you guys, which is great. Another thing just about photographing in general, light is your friend. The more light that you can have, the more flexibility it's getting. Yeah, so having that light will really, really, really minimize any kind of like shakiness that happens. If you do like those moody feels, so if you want something that's more like the images here, these kind of darker images, anything that has kind of a moody feel to it, you will want to like stabilize your phone in some way, because it's going to be, because there's less light, there's more likely for there to be camera shake and blurriness. So I don't think anyone will have a little phone tripod like this, but you can prop it up with pretty much anything. You could tape it to a cup or a jar, or propping it up with some kind of element, so that way it's stable. It's just more, there's going to be less shaking than when you click it with your hand. I think that's pretty much it. I'm happy to go over specific questions that people have, if you guys want to mute or unmute yourself. Oh, Eliana's here. I used a lot of your work to as an example here. Yeah, so if people have questions about their specific setups, works, what they have available, I'm happy to kind of take those questions now. Sure. So if you do end up in that position, so the question was, how would you go about editing if there's two different sources of lighting, which is a great question. So I'm going to go up to where that was. I believe it's here. You could either embrace it like this person did, and again, I think this is pretty successful overall, but there are color temperature differences. What you're going to want to do is selective adjustments for whatever the problem may be. So I can see if I can save this to my desktop from this. I know that I can. Oh, you know what? Hold on. Let me just open this document. We'll just use Ileana's again. So I'm basically going to create that problem in Photoshop and then try to fix that problem in Photoshop for us. Oops. Clear crop. So if you have two different sources of lighting and you do get those kind of spots, sorry, I'm clicking on a bunch of stuff. Let's do. So just to reiterate, don't do what I'm doing. I'm gonna intentionally create myself a problem. So I'm gonna put like kind of a warm area here. Say we had a tungsten bulb and it was creating a hot spot of yellow there. And then we had a cooler bulb over here. And this one is going to be blue because there are different kinds of bulbs. Okay, now we're gonna go back over here. So as you can see, we created that problem. Now there's all this like messy noise happening here. The first way that you can do it, I wouldn't really recommend because you don't have a lot of control, but if you go to this little radial filter here, which is how I created this problem, you can remove the problem in the same way. So when you click and drag, it creates like this radius, and it's always going to be a feather, and you can hover over and try to remove it this way. It's not the most exact, so I probably wouldn't do that. So I'm just gonna go ahead and open image, and I'm gonna show you how to do it in Photoshop. And again, there's like, you're gonna wanna find the best way to do it for yourself. There's a million ways to do it and remove the problem. And oftentimes it's trial and error for me. I'll try one method, and if that's not working, I'll try another method, and I'll try another method to get the best natural look that I can get. White balance is a little hard to do in general, especially once you have this kind of crazy situation going on. So if you go into curves, if you click here, If you hover over black point, gray point, so here's sampling your white point. So I'm going to click here, and the quickest way to do it is click there, and then you're going to want to select one area. So you're going to have to do 2 adjustments in order to balance it out. So we'll click here, and what that did basically is it's trying to make what I clicked on white. So that'll help like limit it. It kind of like made this side a little bit more neutral. So then what I'm going to do is, let's see. Yeah, I think the recording will be posted online. Once you drop that point, you want to mask it after that, because we're only trying to do it in that one place. So I'm going to go back to my brush tool. I'm going to clear, and I'm actually going to remove it on the other half of the image that, oh, sorry, it needs to be black. My computer is slow right now. Sorry, my Photoshop is frozen right now. Go ahead and it is frozen. Basically, you're going to make selective adjustments for each area, and then have to fix it. It takes a lot more time, and it probably won't look perfect. You can get it almost perfect, but it's going to take a lot of really specific blending and adjusting. I'd imagine you would need multiple layers, so I can't, oh, there we go, now it's letting me pull up. You see, I have, for this one image, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 layers until I got to my final image. You might need something like 10 layers, and some of them might include selective adjustments for the background, selective adjustments for the image. If you can avoid multiple light sources, I would, and or if you do use multiple light sources, I would just recommend embracing the end aesthetic of it. So as you're shooting, if you're looking at the image and you're unhappy with the way it looks, you should move your object somewhere where you can control the lighting a little bit more. It is just going to be a really complicated process. So now that it's not frozen, we can kind of do what I was trying to show. So I'm going to remove it from this area. It's just still loading. Okay. So you can see that now this area looks white for the most part. It has like relatively, the color cast is relatively gone. So that's good. I actually feel like the temperature is pretty good all around. This is still a bit yellow to me, so I might come down here and next, what we want to do is, because this is brighter than this area, then we have to bring up the brightness on the other side. So we're going to try to match that area. If you click this little finger and then you click any portion of your image, it'll drop a point and it'll be adjusting for those tones. So if I use this little finger here, now I click, I want to bring this side of the image up. I click and drag up. I'm going to say like right there. So now you can see we have like this huge hot spot. So we're going to do the opposite thing that we just did here. And we're going to paint it in the other way so that it masks it out. There, it's already looking much more even. Again, like it's not perfect, so then I would probably go in with a hue and saturation decrease, especially in the background, to kind of even it out a little further. Sorry, my Photoshop's frozen again. I think trying to live stream and edit and do all this at the same time is kind of freaking it out. But you can see like I've kind of removed some of that. It's still really, really hot right here. I'd still want to bring it down a little bit. Some of the ways to kind of pick an area that's the problem, you adjust for that color, and then you bring the rest of the image up to that point. So it's just going to take a lot more blending and a lot more photoshopping in order to get rid of those color casts. Does that make sense? Hopefully. Does anyone else have any questions or running up to the wire? I know some of you have classes coming up.
Hello, Alex?
Hi.
Alex? Hi! Hey, love, what's up? I have a question.
Yeah,
This is so funny. So I'm gonna I'm gonna photograph more work in natural lighting. And I know you mentioned earlier about being able to, in Photoshop, take the edits that you've made to one photo and apply them to all the photos that you've taken.
Yeah.
Is there a cheat way to do that? Like to grab a photo that I already have on my website if I want my website to stay consistent, to grab a photo that I've already edited or someone else has edited so that I can get the same type of lighting and just, I guess, overall consistency with photos that I'm going to edit? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So unfortunately, there's not an easy way to take something you've already edited and apply those adjustments. Oh, Illy, can you mute yourself so I don't echo? Thank you. Especially because the lighting situation will be different. So every time, even if you try to replicate the exact lighting that you used, it might be in a slightly different position. Things might change. So you can't, even if I gave you my Photoshop file, so there's different file formats that you can save things in. If I give you my Photoshop file, which saves all of my layers. So for instance, if I were to give you, hold on, my Photoshop's loading. Okay, I can't click there. Here we go. So if I were to give you this file, for instance, which has all of my adjustments, and you wanted to apply that to what you were shooting, it might not look good because you're using different lighting, it's in a different scenario. So the adjustments that they might make your image look really crazy. What you can do is you can use it as a point of reference for when you're setting up your lighting and when you're editing that you want to match to it and you edit to it. If you do want to use batch editing, again, so say these are all of your images you shot of, you took 2 pictures of your work that you want to document tomorrow. Again, if you open these both in Photoshop, it'll open in Camera Raw first because you've gone into your presetting and you set that up. The way to do that, if you want to do any adjustments here that affect everything, so it'll cut down on your editing time and look consistent, you go over to the side, you hit Command A, it selects them both here, and then you can make all of your adjustments and it'll apply to both of them. Does that make sense? So this is the quickest way. You can't really take pre-photographed things and map it over, but you can do it if it's all photographed at the same time and you're editing it all at the same time. But that was a really good question.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. I think there was another question about editing for iPhone, like what kind of apps. I know that there are a number of different ones. If you have an iPhone, you can also straight in the photos area, which is pretty good. There's a lot of useful tools in there, especially with tilt shifting. I do minor things with that. Otherwise, you can download any number of them. I don't think any one is better than the other. I think even there might be Lightroom and there's maybe a Photoshop for your phone, but they'd be really, really scaled down. They don't have all the tools. Whatever you end up doing, again, this is an extension of your practice, and however the images end up feeling, you just want them to feel representative of you as an artist. So maybe right now, especially with COVID and the position that we're in, maybe this gallery look of it being in a pristine white walled situation is just not what we're able to do or aiming for at this moment. It might be more like these or this or this, what vibe are you going for? How can you photograph your things and do them the most justice and give them a kind of personality and a feel that is an extension of your practice? Because you can always go back and re-photograph and re-edit once you have the tools available, but how can you present it right now in a way that feels authentic to you as an artist? Sky's the limit. There's no reason why it has to be pristine gallery setting. Use the tools you have and get creative. Oh, yeah. Thank you all for attending.